Hello, I'm Dr. Larry Jones, an ADHD and life coach, retired pediatrician, and also an ADHDer. And I have with me Dr. Joyce Balls, who's an epidemiologist and researcher, formerly of Mayo Clinic and now at Washington University. And we're here today basically to talk to our listeners about ADHD and talk to people who have been successful and been able to manage their ADHD and sometimes other concerns in order to become successful, become resilient, and become the people that they desire to be. And I'll let Dr. Joyce introduce herself briefly and give you a little more information about her background and her work.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Dr. Jones, thank you so much for the opportunity for me to join you today. My name is Dr. Joyce Fallsbury. I am a psychiatric epidemiologist at Washington University School of Medicine. I'm an associate professor of neurology, and I'm the inaugural lead of the Health Disparities and Equity Core and the Night Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. Plus, I am an associate lead in our Precision Health program for community engagement in our Institute of Clinical and Translational Science at WashU. And those are sort of my professional roles. Aside from my professional duties, I am a caregiver for my beautiful mother, who I'm named after. I'm also a wife. I'm also a community activist and very outspoken in those spaces. What else do you want me to talk about?
Well, that's good. Anything else you'd like to mention? Any other activities that you're involved in?
So from a philanthropic stance, I do a lot of work around functional literacy. I live every day with neurodiversity, with dyslexia, and I like to say it's a kissing cousin to ADHD. Because some of the things are very similar in how we process and how we seek resources. I sit on the board of directors for Health Literacy Media, which is related to thinking about literacy for health information. I think that that's very important as well. And there's some other things that I do within my church community as well.
Well, thank you very much for being here today. And I'd like to begin by just getting a little background in terms of when you learned that you had dyslexia plus the ADHD. When did all that come about?
So I was probably about, maybe when I was in kindergarten, there was a problem that my kindergarten teacher noticed. But unfortunately, the original school that I went to for kindergarten didn't really have as many reading resources for students that were living with dyslexia. I was really small as a kid. So a lot of times, small in stature and small in width, not so much so anymore. But one of the things that, in looking at my kindergarten report card, was that once we started the reading activities, there was a notice that I became disengaged. And so my parents decided to switch schools for a variety of reasons to another school that had some additional resources for speech and language pathology, for reading, for kids that were diagnosed with anxiety or ADHD or other things like that. Well, once I switched to this other school, unfortunately, my first grade teacher ended up being out for a bulk of the school year because of some family things. So we kept getting subs. And my mom taught in St. Louis Public Schools, and that was a school within the St. Louis Public School District. And then I ended up being transferred, being promoted to the second grade, but still not able to read. So as a kid, I would memorize my stories and have people read certain books over and over again. And that way I could act like I was reading. And I have memories of doing that. So by the time I got to second grade, I was doing very well with math. Math came pretty easy, but I wasn't reading. And I would stutter when I would be asked to read. And so my parents put me in speech pathology. They knew the speech pathologist well, and they were like, she doesn't have a speech issue. She doesn't have concerns with other things except for the reading. And they said, I think she's dyslexic. So they put me in a summer program at a now closed St. Louis Catholic school called St. Francis. And my educational experience before I was 8 included private schools, Catholic schools, and public schools. And so all of this time, different schools. And it wasn't until I did a summer program that the diagnosis happened. So they did testing. There were a lot of other activity, some of which I don't remember all of it. But once I transferred to St. Francis, I was again promoted to the 3rd grade. And at this point, I'm 8. And girls historically, or those that are born biologically female, tend to be diagnosed about 3 years later than our male counterparts. Because it ends up being things like, well, give her time. You know, she's cute. Maybe she needs a little bit of time to catch up with the boys, but yet, which is a cultural concern that happens in these spaces. So when I got into the 3rd grade, my 3rd grade teacher said, she can't read. We need to do something different. So I was put back a grade and had to redo the 2nd grade. Again, math was easy. And then came a series of tutors. And also special reading classes where I would have to leave the classroom to go with another group of kids to do a reading program. And then I had a tutor. And so by the time I got to the 4th grade, I got through 2nd grade, got through 3rd grade, but still was having issues with phonics and spelling and things like that. By the time I got to the 4th grade, I ended up getting a different reading tutor who I'm still in touch with now. And it's been, I'll tell my age, I'm 48. So that was when I was 10. So that's a long time ago. And she was amazing and encouraged me to read anything that I enjoyed. So the first chapter book I ever read was The Color Purple, which is pretty intense. And I was 10, and it has very complex themes and big words. So because I went to a Catholic school, I was told that I needed to cover the book. So if you remember those, that you would cover books with a paper bag, yes, or newspaper, yes, or a book cover or whatever. So I had to cover it with the newspaper, or I think I used a paper bag, covered it with a paper bag, and then make sure that I kept the book in my pencil case because no one at the school could know that I was reading The Color Purple. So I was reading grade level stuff and The Color Purple. And then every time the scenes got a little complex, I'd have to have a conversation with my parents about it.
Very good.
And so, yeah, so it was years of learning in terms of, because I am a psychiatric epidemiologist and I know a little bit about the diagnosis of ADHD. I actually live with anxiety. And I think some of that is with generalized anxiety disorder. And I think that much of that might also be connected to me living with dyslexia, because there's anxiety. I become anxious when I have to read out loud, even to this day. I take my time, I read ahead. There are other things that I do. I have to write for a living, and I'm pretty well published as a scientist, but there are tools that I use to make sure that the message that I'm conveying is the right message. And luckily now those tools are free, but when I was a kid, those things didn't exist. So, so there are things that I even tell my mentees at WashU and at other places where English may not be the first language, or they may be living with dyslexia, or they may have ADHD or anxiety, that we can now help to make sure that they're able to be their best.
So, a couple of things I'd like to point out here. I mean, what Dr. Balsberry has mentioned the combination of dyslexia and ADHD, which would put her in the category of twice exceptional. And by twice exceptional, we mean that there is some type of learning issue, which in her case was the dyslexia, but that she excels in other areas such as math, in terms of comprehension and other areas. And that combination, unfortunately, can be difficult to pick up because there are very few schools, even in this day and age, that really look at children in that total aspect. But I wanted to point that out because I think that's something that parents as well as educators need to consider when they have children that seem to be slow in one areas, but are almost a genius level in other areas. But again, another thing to point out is how her parents were able to pick up on these issues early on and provide appropriate support as well as constant encouragement. But I think overall, one of the things I would like to ask Dr. Baldberry is to talk a bit about, how these two issues affected you in your college years and on into graduate school.
So when I first went, I went to Xavier University of Louisiana, which is a historically Black college. And when I got to college, so high school came pretty easy. I finished high school in 3 years. I did a lot of studying. I took all the advanced classes that I could take. And my high school was a STEM focused high school. It was actually focused on, it was called Health Career. So it was focused on math and science. And so when I graduated like fifth in my class in 3 years. So the tools that I used in grade school and junior high were appropriate for college, were appropriate for high school, but not necessarily appropriate for college. So when I got to Xavier, my first semester was terrible. I couldn't focus. The reading assignments were hard. I was a biology major when I first came in. It was the wrong major for me, and I was trying to follow in my dad's footsteps, who has a degree in biology and PE. I didn't want to do the PE part because I'm completely uncoordinated, but that's another story. But the biology science, that it was killing me, and my anxiety got worse, and some other socialization things I think also happened. And so I was finding myself gravitating to a group of friends that had similar issues, but they didn't want to talk about it. And so it wasn't until going on academic probation after that semester, coming home and having a conversation with my dad, I'm like, I don't know if I want to be a biology major. He was like, just stick it out for one more semester. I was like, I don't know. So I stuck it out for one more semester. Grades went up, but I was doing well in my lab-based courses, which were hands-on, but not the lectures, because things just weren't clicking. It just wasn't. So I sought some tutoring. And I also sought support for thinking about time management, which was a big issue. So I had to rethink how I wanted my day to look. And then my everyday became very routine. And that really helped what time I got up every morning, what time I went to class, what time I studied, how long I studied, and then what days of the week. And then I was able to actually enjoy my college experience. And so when I was teaching undergrads at the University of Toledo, which was open enrollment, unlike Xavier, where you had to apply and have a certain test score and certain levels of grades to get in because it was private Catholic, UT was open enrollment, which means that for undergrads at one point, I think it still is, we had students that had never been tested for anything, and they would end up in my classroom. And I'm like, okay, this kid can't read. And so, or this kid is having some anxiety or ADHD. And so making sure that I, as a professor, provided them with resources to be their best self. So I learned in undergrad, well, the second thing I did was I switched my major. And my parents were like, and I didn't tell my parents. I think you know this story. I didn't tell my parents. And I took a psych class and loved it. And everything was clicking. Like it was just like, and I was like, okay, I can do this and be successful. So I switched my major second semester. So got through my sophomore year, second semester in April of my sophomore year. So basically going into my junior year of college, I changed majors. And my parents were like, when you become a psych major? And so that was an interesting conversation. But I had to do that in order to be successful because my grades got up. I felt like I found a home. And because the psych department understood dyslexia, understood anxiety, understands ADHD, it ended up being a place where I could be fully, authentically Joy without the fear of failure. And so that helped. And it also helped when I got to grad school and then when I did my Ph.D. as well.
So psychology became that sort of safe place for you.
It did.
That allowed you to open up and be your full self. It allowed you to be able to pursue a passion a little bit different than what your parents thought, but a passion that was true to you.
Yes. It's funny how that happens. And it's the same thing with epidemiology. I thought I was going to go into med school and follow in your footsteps. And I was taking on my pre-med requirements after college. Still wasn't doing well in those science classes. Like if anybody's taking intro to biology, the Krebs cycle killed me. I said that was the class that broke the biology majors off. And so I went ahead and had an internship in seroepidemiology. It wasn't really called that at the St. Louis Health Department in the Metro AIDS office when my dad was working in minority health there. And his mentee hired me. And I noticed that the system that we were using for tracking some of our cases for some of the things that we were looking at for HIV and other sexually transmitted infections was cumbersome. So I created a different system, which was what epidemiologists do. And it was very natural because of how my brain thinks. So when I got into grad school for epi, it was easy. It wasn't easy, but it was like it clicked. And it was the same thing for my doctorate. Now, there were some classes that killed me, even though I did well in math and certain types of math. First time I took biostatistics, I didn't do too well. Second time I took it, I didn't do too well, but I passed it. But and in my advanced stats, I did well. So I think it's just allowing for a child to find what clicks for them and then allowing them to pursue that path, be it art, be it math, be it science, be it economics, be it business, and then seeing how they grow.
I think that's really important, and unfortunately puts a lot of work on the parent to really be able to get to know the child and try different things to see where the child excels. Where are those talents? Where does the passion lie? The ideal life is that the passion and the career are the same, but that's not possible for everybody. The passion may be a side type of skill, involvement, engagement.
It's true.
So, but I think as we proceed here, I'd like for Dr. Balsberry to talk about her superpowers.
So I think one of my superpowers is dyslexia, because it requires abstract thinking. I don't see things very linear the way my friends do and things like that. I will look at a process of what we're thinking we want to do, especially from research or things like that, where I'm thinking about all of the things that can occur. which also can cause anxiety as well. So I think both dyslexia and anxiety are superpowers because it keeps me honest. And then the other thing that I think is a superpower is me being willing to show my vulnerability. I think that it's often hard to share our struggles. It's often hard to share our failures. You know, I failed as a biology major. I failed. I mean, like that was not a good look for me. I also failed the second grade. I liked it so much I had to do it twice. So I mean, there's that. But I also think the other superpower is acknowledging that I don't know everything, which is hard, right? Because in the field that I'm in, I'm supposed to be the quote unquote world's expert in my space. But there are so many things that I don't know, and I'm a lifetime learner. And I think that that opens up the door to learn other things. Another superpower I have is I love to cook. So that relaxes me, that calms my mind. So I think we have to all find things that will calm our mind. And I recognize that I come from a background with a level of privilege that allowed me to have parents that could be that engaged. And I know that some kids may not have that. And so my hope is that educators are able to fill in the gaps for helping students find their happy place and where they can excel.
That is definitely our hope and dream that there will be more funds put into education to pay teachers more and to have these resources necessary to find what each child can excel in. Now, one other question. I'd like to give you the opportunity to give advice to any of our listeners out there who think they may have ADHD and, you know, suggestions of steps or course to take.
Okay. For ADHD, I think it's really important to have a conversation with the child first to find out and to listen, really hear them.
Yes.
On where they feel that their strengths are and where areas that they would like to grow, and then have that same conversation with their teachers and educational team. And if it's not the right fit, then find the right school. And you know, and that's hard. Kids are resilient. You know, I went to 4 different schools before I was 8. By the time I was 8, I made friends at each one of those schools, and then asking them if they want to maintain any of their friendships. I think that helps as well. And then giving them the space to fail and to succeed, and just reminding the child that failure leads to success. For ADHD and other things in that space is having a schedule and knowing that it might have to adjust based on where the child is and how they grow. Exactly. For dyslexia, I really think, which is one of my major concerns for me, is making sure that I tell people I have it when I feel comfortable. It's not as easy for me to not tell folks now because I did a TED talk about it. but prior to I was 40, I didn't always share that. And then allowing the child to share that piece of them if they choose to, if they feel safe to share it. And so I think that those are the things. And then asking about tutors and what resources are available. And then remembering that the educational psychologists who might do some of the testing might have a very different perspective than somebody that's in clinical psych, or that might have something different than the pediatrician. And then having those teams come together to say, okay, what is best if those resources exist? And then if not, then keep asking for them, and then keep asking your child, are you okay? Do you feel safe? Do you feel that you have what you need to be successful? And then if the kid gets bored, ask them what they want to do next, because that would happen with me. I would get bored, I'd finish stuff, and my parents would say, maybe she needs to read another book, because now I'm an avid reader. And that's because I was allowed to read whatever it is I wanted to read, which may not be always age appropriate, but it helped build my vocabulary. It helped build my understanding of writing and the beauty of it as well. So that's hard because I know that there are times when parents want to say, okay, you're only going to read these age appropriate books, but maybe let them try something that's a grade level higher or something like that. So my pieces of advice are listen, being open, setting set schedules, and being open to adjusting them if the child needs it adjusted. And then being willing to tell them that each one of their failures is leading to success in another space.
Very good. Very good. I'd like to thank Dr. Ballsbury for her time and sharing her story.
Thank you.
And I hope this will be a help to some of our listeners out there. And as we go forward, we'll do our best to be our best selves. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much.